You are listening to The Catholic Wire.
What follows is a story taken from the book The Art of Catholic Mothering by Maura Koulik. This recording and distribution has been made with the permission of the author.
This mother was married at 22 and had 7 children. There are now 21 grandchildren. One of her daughters is a Dominican nun. As a single adult, I wanted nothing more than to marry and raise a family. Being a working girl, it was easy to meet young men, but it takes prayer to find the right husband, and for me, Lent was a time for such prayers. Daily Mass, every devotional service, fasting, no dating, and no entertainment was my way of asking God to help me know my vocation. One of my aunts, a nun, kept suggesting that I enter the convent. But my prayers were more on the order of, please, God, don't ask me to be a nun. Send me the man I am to marry. On Easter evening, I went out with some friends and met my future husband. Although he and I had been introduced before, from that Easter on, our friendship became something special. God had answered my prayers. When we were married, he was in the Marine Corps and attending college. While pregnant with our first child, I found the prayers in the little book Catholic Mother's Manual by A. Francis Coombs, S.J., to be very helpful. I read the prayers for a safe delivery and a healthy baby faithfully, and when the baby arrived, all 9 pounds of him were very healthy indeed. During the 3rd month of my next pregnancy, I had a bad fall. Later that day, I picked up my 10-month-old son and suddenly began to bleed heavily. I spent the next few days in bed, but soon recovered and got back to normal until my 5th month. The bleeding returned, and it returned again in my 7th month. By then, I'd lost so much blood, I was admitted to the local hospital for a blood transfusion. The doctor put a call through to my husband, who was away at a military training program. He arrived the night before I delivered our baby, stillborn. The baby was normal, but very small, 1.5 pounds, due, the doctor said, to a lack of nutrition from my placenta. My husband was a great comfort to me. I was able to receive the sacraments, and the priest gave me a booklet, Confidence in God. I read it, trying to have the confidence I needed to trust in God's ways. My hospital roommate had also lost her baby. She told me, as she cried and cried, that she was a fallen-away Catholic. I could see that she did not have her faith to strengthen or aid her as I did. Misunderstanding my strength in the face of God's will, she remarked that I must be very hard-hearted not to shed tears as she did. I was suffering too, but it's my nature to bear things quietly. The sacraments calm and strengthen me. The graces God gave me when I lost the baby strengthened my spiritual life. My baby's death had come at a time when I was taking God's goodness for granted. After, I began to take my faith more seriously. I realized that, for all things, even if I could not see it at the time, God was to be praised and thanked for his wisdom. Over the years, our family grew to 2 sons and 2 daughters. By that time, my husband had returned to the Marine Corps, and we had made many transfers and moves over the years. Then, in 1966, word came that he was to go to Vietnam. Saint Theresa, the little flower, became my intercessor, my strength. I kept a rose in a reliquary from a Saint Theresa seminary. It sat at the head of my bed, and each night I prayed to St. Theresa for my husband's safety. His letters arrived, sometimes only one every 2 weeks, and time seemed to creep by. I survived day by day. This was the most difficult year of my life. Our 4 children were very small. Our youngest, just 8 weeks old, had to undergo minor surgery. Afterwards, she became ill with a high fever and would not eat or drink. Blood tests indicated that she had an internal infection, but further testing did not reveal the cause. Her fever persisted, and the only relief I could offer was to place her in a tub of cool water. During one of these bathing sessions, I noticed a swollen area on her chest. Again, a trip to the doctor. He gave her an injection of penicillin, and finally she recovered. Then measles made the rounds, infecting one child after the other. Imagine all this with a husband half a world away. The only way I could attend Sunday Mass was to hire a babysitter for the youngest children. I know that wars have touched many lives and caused much suffering, but in the end St. Theresa heard my prayers, and at last my husband returned home safely from Vietnam. Looking back at those difficult years, I remember one amusing incident that occurred while my husband was overseas. It was occasionally possible for members of the armed forces to call home from Vietnam via amateur radio. One day I received a call, but the connection was terrible. I couldn't understand the voice coming from the other end of the line, and I'm sure he couldn't understand me. After a very puzzling few moments, I hung up, wondering what my husband was trying to say. Shortly after, I received another call explaining that the operator had made a mistake. I'd been talking to a perfect stranger. The right connection was finally made, and I was able to have a conversation with my real husband, bringing him up to date on the baby's condition and all the other news from home. I've often wondered who the other man was and what he thought when he heard my goings-on about a sick baby and all our other calamities. By the time our 3rd daughter arrived, we were attending a military chapel in Virginia that was starting a CCD program, and the chaplain was looking for teachers. I told him that I wasn't a teacher. I didn't even know that much about my Catholic faith. I had attended a country school in 4 years at a Catholic high school, but I received D's in religion, so how could I teach the subject? The chaplain said that to teach CCD, it's the will that is most important. I had the will, so I started helping the children prepare for their first Holy Communion. Our 2nd son had already made his first Holy Communion, but not his first confession. This didn't seem right to me. So along with teaching the regular class, I taught him to make a good confession. At that time, the Second Vatican Council was already taking its toll. We were trying to be good, faithful Catholics, and so went along with what our priests were saying and teaching. Little did we realize where they were leading us. One Sunday, our Catholic chaplain preached, "If you have 5 or more children," he said, "you have a problem. Come and see me. We have a dispensation." What he really meant was that he would give married people permission to use birth control. We had 5 children, which we considered a blessing from God, not a problem. I knew that the problem was not ours. I had read in the mother's manual about anti-family forces, and suddenly those forces were all around us. Even those families we've thought of as good Catholics made jokes when they saw a woman pregnant with another baby. Once, during a doctor's visit, even my own physician told me I had too many children, right in the middle of a crowded waiting room. Even though I was very shy at that time, I turned, looked straight at him, and said, "Doctor, that is a matter of opinion." With that, I walked out, later asking myself, did I really say that? As our children grew older and more in number, I began to feel as if I was losing control. The older ones were always outside. Where exactly, I had no idea. And if I was able to get them inside, They gave me a blank stare when I asked them to help with the chores. Our chaplain at that time was giving a set of 6 conferences called Child Management, based on the book Child Management Program for Parents and Teachers by Judith M. Smith. I attended the classes and very quickly learned that successful child management was really all about mom's management. The trick was to give children rules, 1 rule at a time. Explain the rule and what consequences would be expected if that rule was not obeyed. The punishment must be enforced by the one who makes the rule. Punishment in proportion and with reason to the offense committed. Tell the child only the punishment that was actually in store for them. A child, for example, knows that if he is threatened unreasonably, "I'm going to murder you," the threat is empty. I needed to set the rule and the follow-up, not just once, but every time. The theory sounded great. Now all I had to do was put it into practice. To start with, I told the boys they were to clean their room every Saturday. The first Saturday, I divided the room in half. Each boy had his part to clean, and neither was to push his mess to the other boy's half. This chore was to be finished by dinner time, or there would be no pizza, our Saturday night treat. My younger son sat and cried. The older boy just sat. The afternoon passed. Finally, my younger one decided to do his work. The older one decided to test Mom. Dinner time arrived and the pizza was ready. Both children reported to the table. I made a check of the room for cleanliness and judiciously sent the older child to his room without supper. No supper tonight, and no food until breakfast. That was the punishment I'd set for breaking the rule. The following Saturday, the rule was again in place, and amazingly enough, in no time both halves of the room were clean. No one wanted to miss pizza 2 weeks in a row. As the younger children grew, they learned the rules from the example of the older children. As each rule was known, another was added. You can be sure the rules were tested, maybe not right away, but eventually they all were challenged. I also found that the rule must be important enough to be necessary. With a punishment I knew I would and could enforce, not just once, but every time without fail. If I failed to enforce a rule, the children would know I wasn't serious about it. I also made sure that the consequences were not more of a reward than a punishment. For instance, Joey did not eat his supper and was told to sit in the corner. Joey happens to prefer sitting in the corner, taking a time out, rather than eating what is on his plate. Of course, once he found out that all he would get to eat later was what was on his plate in the first place, then the punishment was no longer a reward. My, how I had to outsmart them. I also learned that allowing children to cry can be perfectly acceptable. Sometimes a good cry is what it takes. They do stop eventually. After a while, my children realized that crying was not a way out of doing what they were asked to do, and crying didn't make me give in. Eventually, my children and I learned who was really in charge. When the rules and punishments were just and reasonable for their age, and when yes always meant yes, and no always meant no. I only had to say no once. They knew that even if they asked me over and over, my answer wouldn't change. Once when I was discussing discipline with another mother, she told me she thought I was too hard on my children. Shortly after her remark, I read the book, A Wife, Mystic and Mother by Albert Bessiere, Jesuit, the story of Blessed Anna Maria Taigi. To my great comfort, she'd used the same discipline philosophy with her 7 children that I was using. That was good enough for me, and I continued with the rules as usual, with success. Once again, my husband was sent overseas. Even though it wasn't easy having him leave us for another year, this time I didn't panic. The children and I made sure we always said our evening prayers every night, praying that Daddy would have a safe return. Our oldest was 12, and I had things pretty well under control. We had a routine. There was time for work, play, and bed. one of our daughters thought that the only hour that existed was 8:30, because that was the time to go to school and also the time to go to bed. My husband's return from overseas brought orders to be stationed in California. When I heard the news, I cried. How do you raise a good Catholic in California? We'd been there once, and I never wanted to return. But orders were orders. Again, the church near our new home had a CCD program. Again, I signed up to teach. This time, I had second graders who had not yet learned the Hail Mary or the Our Father. It became evident that prayer life, both in the parish and at home, had disappeared. Through all these trials and difficulties, I continued my devotion to St. Therese. One day, information about a novena in her name arrived in the mail and caught my attention. I began praying it with the intention that I might do the holy will of God. During the course of the novena to my little flower, it seemed that I smelled roses. I don't know if I actually did. No roses were in bloom at the time. But that scent in the air made me sure she was going to answer my request. Within 6 weeks, I learned that I was to have another child, our 7th. This wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I asked to do God's will. Still, I accepted without complaint. The pregnancy went uneventfully until 2 months or so before the baby was born, when I was informed he was in breech position. I prayed to St. Therese again, asking that the baby would turn. 6 weeks before the due date, I felt the baby make a full revolution. I ended up having a natural birth and a healthy son, 9 pounds, 11 ounces. Another wonderful thing happened only a few months after I had made the novena. A retired missionary priest came to help in our parish. He taught the Baltimore Catechism rather than give a sermon at Mass, and I loved it. He also taught a scripture class for adults. This priest expressed a holy love for our Lord that I'd never heard from other priests. He baptized our son with the traditional rites, and I also discovered that he had a great love and devotion to my friend St. Therese. After we'd been acquainted for a short time, he invited me to attend daily Mass, which he offered in his private chapel. To my complete surprise and joy, as I knelt on the wooden floor, I found I was assisting at the Tridentan Mass in Latin, the Mass I'd known and loved before Vatican II. I didn't know that any priest still offered it. I began attending Mass daily. Too soon, my husband and I and our children had to make yet another move, this time to Texas. Here there was no traditional Mass. We read The Secret of the Rosary, a rosebud per night. My tears were plentiful, my pillow wet many nights with my weeping. With an active family to care for, night was the only time I had to mourn the great loss of the traditional Mass and benediction. After 5 months, we found a Tridentan Mass in Oklahoma City, 265 miles away. Regardless, we loaded up our children and made the trip once each month, and said many prayers at home. The Rosary and Catholic reading became our strength. We read The Church's Year of Grace by Pius Parsh every day. It was our oasis in a spiritual desert. It was also time for our 3 oldest daughters to be confirmed. We took a 13-hour drive to have their sacrament of confirmation done in the traditional rite, a long, tiresome trip for the 9 of us, but well worth it. My husband was originally supposed to have a 3-year tour in Texas, but God had mercy on us. After 1 year, we were transferred again, this time to New Orleans, where there was a Tridentan Mass offered in a nearby gym. In New Orleans, my children attended a catechism class. My high school son seemed surprised that what he was learning was exactly what I had been teaching them all along. It could be said that my children had a teaching and preaching mom. They didn't care much for the preaching part, especially when they didn't want to hear what was being said. In fact, I told one daughter, as she stood next to her future husband. "I am your mother until someone else gives you birth." I figured that her future husband might as well know what kind of mother-in-law he was getting while he still had time to back out. My daughter didn't want me to speak to them about the care of their souls, but I will always be concerned for the salvation of my children's souls, even when they are over the magic age of 18. Turned out her boyfriend wasn't in such a hurry to get married after all. When I heard that there was soon to be a traditional Catholic school and church in the Midwest, I immediately knew that that was where I wanted to live. We made the journey to Kansas to visit. I loved it. We moved, and now we've been living in Kansas for over 20 years. Our family has helped with many projects around the school campus and parish, all for the greater honor and glory of God and for the good of souls, ours included. Daily Mass, the sacraments, and retreats have helped every member of our family. The children have attended the school, and their father is now one of the teachers. You may think that since we have raised our children, we can relax. Well, it just doesn't work that way. We have 21 grandchildren, more expected, and we are keeping busy. I must admit that it is easier the second time around, or maybe the grandchildren have parents who have rules that make it easier for us all. Our children are out on their own now, but one thing hasn't changed. I still pray for each one of them, sometimes more for one than the others. They each have their own needs, and each must make his or her own decisions. I'm no longer the shy and timid woman of years ago. When a child seems to be too comfortable in the world, I still preach and hope they will understand. The one thing we must never forget, as an old priest once told a group of us in his instructions, right is right, even if nobody's doing it, and wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it.
Thank you for listening to the Catholic Wire. If you have found this show helpful, please say a prayer for all our collaborators. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share with your friends. For questions and comments, you may contact us at thecatholicwire.org.